Hello, you're all very welcome to AWARE's first webinar of 2021. New year, new you, prioritizing our mental health. We're just waiting for people to come in. We want as many people as possible to start when we start, so we'll just give a few more moments. And just to welcome all of you. It's really great to have you here. Thank you. I'm just waiting for a few more minutes just to allow as many people as possible to join us. Just see if I can check how many people are there. So it's fantastic. So we've got already over 300 people and the numbers are still coming in. So we'll just wait for a few more minutes. And just those of you who joined a few minutes ago, thank you for your patience. And I think we're about ready to start. There's still a few more people coming in. And I'm just waiting until that slows down. Yeah, so I'm going to start now. So thank you very, very much, each of you, and welcome to AWARE's first webinar of 2021. A new year, new you, prioritizing our mental health. I'm delighted to welcome you and to our speakers, Dr. Clare Kambamettu, Dr. Sheila Gilheany, and Dr. Paul Dalton. My name is Claire Hayes. I work as a clinical director with AWARE. I also work as a clinical psychologist, and I'm going to be moderating and facilitating this webinar. So I'd like to introduce you to our three speakers and a little bit of background on them, and put my glasses on so I can read this properly. Dr. Clare Kambamettu is a clinical psychologist with over a decade of experience working with both adults and children. She is a passionate advocate for improving mental health by building resilience as individuals and in our communities. Clare is a regular speaker at events including Wellfest, Beo Wellness, and others, and is also a presenter of the RTE series EcoEye. Dr. Sheila Gilheany is Chief Executive Officer at Alcohol Action Ireland, the national independent advocate for reducing alcohol harm. Sheila has a background in physics and has extensive experience in policy development and advocacy. She has led a range for not-for-profit organisation in science, education, public engagement, and social enterprise. Dr. Paul Dalton is Associate Professor of Psychology and Head of Psychology at St. Vincent's University Hospital. He is founder and director of the MPsych in Mindfulness Based Interventions at UCD, the MSc. He has completed a number of funded research projects and has presented and published research both nationally and internationally. He is also a regular media contributor. And we're delighted to have the three speakers with us today. AWARE, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an organisation to support people with depression and bipolar disorder. And we do that by offering a range of services that are free. We provide free support services and wellbeing programs for anyone impacted by anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder, and also for people who support a loved one. We also have a lot of mental health resources that are available on the website aware.ie. So we will be encouraging you, inviting you to ask questions via the question box. But just to let you know in advance that unfortunately we won't be able to get to everyone's question. So our team will work on compiling the questions, and then we will take the ones that come in that represent the most often asked question. So with that long introduction, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Clare Kambamettu, who's going to be talking to us about eat, sleep, move, the relationship between physical and mental health. Thank you, Clare.
Thanks for that introduction, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to share this space. I need to make it very clear at the start of this talk that I'm neither a dietitian, medical doctor, or a physio. The information that I'm going to present is based in my own experience and my understanding of what I've read as a clinical psychologist who's interested in the links between physical and mental health. I grew up in a house with a mum who had studied physio and nutrition, and the phrase, "you are what you eat," was embedded in my brain by the age of about 3. And mum was way ahead of her time, always trying to force seeds and vegetables and organic lentils down our throats in the 1980s, at a time when microwave dinners were way more normal and to me looked far more tasty as well. And I remember the burning humiliation of having a lunchbox full of chopped cucumber in the schoolyard when other people had far tastier and normal things. So as a mortified teenager, I took to hiding my healthy and nutritious lunches under my bed while sneaking off down to the Chippers for lunch with my friends. Although I had to find an alternative solution when I woke up one night to hear mice feasting on my beetroot sandwiches. Gave me a bit of a fright. Obviously, that simple phrase, "you are what you eat," doesn't reflect the complexity or the intricacy of the links between the human body and mind. However, it was the trigger that propelled me in my 20s, as I was striving to qualify as a psychologist, to start reading and learning a bit more about the two. And I was really not very fit then. I had a love-hate relationship with sport in school, loving it mostly for getting me out of class for the occasional match and hating it for pretty much everything else. But then one day I read an article that scared the bejeepers out of me, and it started me on a path that changed my relationship with exercise entirely. I was trying to give up smoking at the time, and I read a paper about how not doing exercise and moderate smoking posed the same risk for developing heart disease, cancer, obesity, and ultimately premature death, which really shocked me actually, because it was something I hadn't known before. But regular moderate exercise reduces our risk of premature death by about 50%. And if somebody, I thought, could give us a pill for that, wouldn't we all take it? So I figured to myself, why the hell would I give up one thing I loved, which was smoking at the time, for the sake of living longer and not at least try the other? And so I bought a pair of runners and started huffing and puffing my way around the streets of southwest London. And I mean huffing, I could barely run a few hundred meters without having to stop and catch my breath. However, within a few short weeks, I noticed something. Well, a few things actually. I was sleeping better. I didn't feel as frazzled at work in stressful situations. I didn't feel as moody as I had sometimes done. And I found a greater sense of ease and pride in my body at its ability to carry me around the world. But I wasn't sure why that was happening. I knew something was happening, but wasn't sure why. So firstly, just to mention sleep, I think sleep is the oddest thing. As animals who've previously had to survive much harsher conditions, it seems counterintuitive to me that we would need to lie down and be totally vulnerable for 8 hours in the dark. And anyone who's ever watched a horror movie must know that's the worst time to go to sleep. Despite the fact that it's been a human behavior that's been around for eternity, we still know relatively little about why we need so much sleep. But what the research does show is that sleep is really essential for our physical and mental health. From a physical health perspective, poor sleep is linked to a whole host of problems, including dementia, various cancers, infertility, and there's no physical illness that's not worsened by poor sleep. I don't want to scare you with too many facts about what happens when we don't get enough sleep, but for those of you interested in finding out more, have a look at Matthew Walker's TED Talks online, or get your hands on one of his books. However, if you think that knowing more about these risks would worry you rather than motivate you to actually make changes in your sleeping pattern, do not look that stuff up, because it can be a little bit scary. And the reason being that when we worry about things, including sleep, it affects our sleep. I mean, I could sleep for Ireland, as my poor boyfriend, who has sat through many a movie with me napping on his arm, can testify to. But when I'm stressed, I feel totally wired at bedtime. And if I do get to sleep, I find myself wide awake at 5 a.m. thinking about how bad it is that I can't get to sleep. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that, because when our mind is struggling, our sleep is usually one of the first things to be affected. And the frustrating thing is that changes to our sleeping pattern are often an early symptom of a mental health problem, especially depression. And disruptions to sleep are now known to cause and worsen some mental health problems too. So the important thing is to try and not worry about it too much, easier said than done, I know, and to take control of what you can control, adopt good sleep hygiene techniques. There's a great guide and a couple of really helpful videos from sleep experts on Aware's website. And I'm also just going to leave this little nugget here for us to come back to later. Studies show that regular aerobic exercise, so brisk walking, running, swimming, cycling, rowing, that kind of stuff, help us to fall asleep faster, spend more time in deep sleep, and awaken less often during the night. So moving on to exercise, why did running help me to start feeling better as well as to sleep more? So we're going to talk a bit about depression first. And depression, as many of you may know, is the leading cause of disability worldwide, with about 300 million people affected by it globally. And major depressive disorder is associated with an increased likelihood of things like school dropout, chronic physical diseases, and extended periods of time off work. And despite the availability of effective treatments for depression, only a minority of people actually receive professional help. And even if we're never diagnosed with clinical depression, most of us are likely to experience low mood at some point in our lifetime as a response to life, to grief, to relationship problems, stress at work, and in these times, perhaps the loss of a job. It's a very, very normal response to feel sad at times like that. And the research is hugely encouraging and consistently shows that exercise is an effective treatment for depression. It's often just as beneficial as other really well-known and popular treatments like antidepressant medication or cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a psychological technique. Additionally, it has very few side effects when done safely, and it's way less costly than psychotherapy. And it's interesting to me that mental health professionals, and including myself as a psychologist, I talk a little bit with people about exercise, but when you look at the research that's available as to how effective exercise is for depression, it's really, really inspiring. So just some of the findings are for older adults who have a diagnosis of moderate depression. 16 weeks of regular exercise has shown to be just as effective as antidepressant medication if the person didn't exercise before. Individuals with depression who take up exercise alongside another treatment and continue with it are less likely to relapse and experience another depressive episode 1 year on. And people who regularly exercise have fewer symptoms of anxiety and depression overall than people who don't. And when people begin to experience symptoms of mild anxiety and depression, as is normal in our lives, exercise works to improve these symptoms, even if the person changes nothing else about their lifestyle. But what type of exercise is most effective for treating depression? Several studies show that moderate to high intensity exercise is better than low intensity exercise, so slow walking, when it comes to treating depression. We know that both aerobic, so running, brisk walking, swimming, cycling, climbing stairs, and non-aerobic, so weightlifting, plyometrics, HIIT workouts, sprinting when you're running, they're both effective. But some studies do actually show that even light aerobic exercise, like walking 3 to 5 times a week, has a significant effect on clinical symptoms of depression. So the take-home message is really that some exercise is better than none. And when it comes to depression, more seems to be better, but all types of exercise seem to be effective. The next thing I just wanted to talk a bit about is anxiety disorders, which again, anxiety, a very normal part of the human experience. And when an anxiety problem becomes a disorder, it usually means one of a number of different problems or a number of different disorders. So rates of anxiety at the moment are especially high thanks to a decade that's seen a huge global recession, catastrophic climate change, and now a pandemic on top of it all. And a study conducted in July 2020, just after the first lockdown, found that 20% of us here in Ireland are now experiencing symptoms of a generalized anxiety disorder. And again, it's totally normal for us all to experience worry and anxiety, but if you've spoken to a professional who's given you a diagnosis, you might have heard words like generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, social anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The evidence suggests that exercise is an effective treatment for anxiety disorders that are both acute, so something like panic disorder, and long-term, something like post-traumatic stress disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. Those who already take part in regular exercise are less likely to experience symptoms of anxiety as long as they continue exercising, even if something really challenging happens to them. And exercise works as both a standalone treatment for anxiety. So that is when a person does nothing more than take up exercise, their symptoms of anxiety can improve. But interestingly, when exercise and other treatments are combined, people experience even greater relief. There's still limited research available as to what exercise is most helpful in reducing anxiety and whether different forms of exercise work for different types of anxiety. There's growing evidence for the idea that aerobic exercise, so something like running or brisk walking, benefits people with panic disorder. And again, particularly so in addition to other treatments. And I have my own anecdotal evidence of that. Following my dad's death a couple of years ago, I really struggled to come to terms with my own mortality, purpose in life, eventual death, all of those things that it's very common to struggle with after you lose somebody you love. And I started to experience those symptoms of panic, like a racing heartbeat and feeling like it was really hard to breathe. Thankfully, I knew what those symptoms were and how to treat them, but they still remained desperately uncomfortable. I found doing exercise and getting out for a run when I felt like that was not only reassuring to me in the moment that my heart was fine, that I could breathe properly and I wasn't about to keel over and die, but in the aftermath, it also lifted my mood and taught me that I was capable of handling the anxiety I felt, no matter how catastrophic it was. So a fair summary of the research in this field is that there is evidence to suggest that exercise is an effective treatment for anxiety, but more research is needed to figure out exactly what types of exercise are most helpful. Additional early research that's ongoing at the moment also seems to show that exercise is really helpful in managing other mental health problems like low self-esteem, psychosis, addictions of various kinds, and even ADHD in kids. So we can no longer pretend that our mind and body are two separate entities. Clearly, what happens in one has an effect on what happens in the other. But how and why do these effects occur? Well, in relation to exercise, it increases serotonin, which is the same neurotransmitter that a lot of antidepressants work on. It makes us feel happy. It also increases endorphin levels, another one of our happy hormones. It regularizes sleep. Getting a good quality sleep is, as we spoke about earlier, essential for good mental health. It reduces the immune system chemicals that can make low mood and stress even worse. And it increases the flow of blood to our brains, specifically to a part of the brain called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is implicated in our fight or flight or anxiety response. That flow of blood also improves our concentration and attention, and it slows cognitive decline as we get older, so reduces our risk of things like dementia. It also makes our brain more resilient to stresses that may occur in the future. So even if you're using exercise to manage stress now, know that it will help when stress arises next month or next year too. And psychologically, the social interaction and the feeling of purposeful activity of exercise, alongside a sense of achievement, increases our well-being. Finally, the parasympathetic nervous system, which functions as part of our rest and restore, our calming system, is activated by various different types of exercise. And just a little word on green exercise, which is an emerging field of research in the UK. It looks at the difference between exercising outdoors and indoors. So far, the results show that being outside actually induces the positive effects of exercise to an even greater degree. So if you can and you feel able to, try and get outside. However, whether you're inside or outside, the important thing to do is find a physical activity that you enjoy. I mean, if you're anything like me, I'm a devil for putting myself through those classes that I absolutely hate and dread, and I might keep them up for a couple of weeks at a time before I give in. And all animals, including us humans, seek pleasure and avoid pain. So how you think about what you're doing, and if it's painful for you, will ultimately affect whether you continue doing it or not. And right now is a super time to experiment with different activities, as so many have moved online and many places are offering free trials of their classes. Just going back briefly to my mum's old motto, you are what you eat. Turns out she was onto something, and don't I hate having to admit that my mother was right all along, but she was. And we all know that to keep physically well, diet is really important, although it can be a bit confusing with all of the information that floats around about what food is best. Should we eat red meat? Are carbs bad for you? How much sugar is too much sugar? Consensus from research indicates that a varied, balanced diet with large amount of fruit and veg is best. It's early days when it comes to research into nutrition and mental health, but a number of studies have shown that eating well is associated with increased well-being. One study found higher levels of well-being were reported by people who ate more fruit and vegetables. Another showed that a Mediterranean-style diet, so that one that's high in vegetables, fruits, pulses and nuts, beans, cereals, all of that kind of stuff, when that was supplemented with a fish oil over a 6-week period, that actually led to a reduction in depression among the people who took part in that trial. We also know that a healthy diet in childhood is hugely important, and a lot of studies have focused on outcomes for kids. So we now know that a poor diet, so high levels of saturated fat, refined carbohydrates and processed food products, is linked to poorer mental health in children and adolescents. And it makes sense that the same would be true for adults. Before I finish, I just want to mention the field of psychobiotics, which I find fascinating. We've all been taught that our brain controls our body, our mental health, and everything else. But research from the last decade or so is showing that our gut, so our intestines, our stomach, our digestive system, and our brain are inextricably connected, to the point where some researchers have started calling the gut our second brain. It's been noted that gut problems and digestive problems and mental health disorders often coincide. So people with gastrointestinal disorders have higher than average rates of neuropsychiatric problems like bipolar disorder, depression, and people with schizophrenia often have markers of gastrointestinal inflammation as well. And there's 2 professors in University College Cork here in Ireland, Dr. John Cryan and Ted Denan, who are at the forefront of the international research into psychobiotics. So that is how, when different bacteria that are introduced into our gut can have a positive impact on our mental health. And last year, a large review of studies found that probiotics yielded a small but significant effect in reducing anxiety and depression. However, as I mentioned, whilst promising, these studies are very much in their infancy and are things to try if you feel like them, but not to depend on, or things that I can say will conclusively help us to all feel better. But there's so much research that's happening in this field at the moment. It's a really exciting time, and I'd urge you to keep having a look and see what comes out in the next few months in relation to the things that I've been speaking about. But in conclusion, our body and mind do not function in isolation. As boring as it is, the most effective way of managing our physical and mental health is to achieve just a good enough balance. Eat well most of the time, motivate yourself to exercise, and try to get enough sleep when you can. And if you're thinking about making some changes right now, then I really applaud you. It's a really challenging time, to say the least, and even more difficult to motivate ourselves than usual because of that. And I'm so glad that Dr. Paul Dalton is going to be talking about self-compassion in a little while, because that is so important when we're thinking about making changes to our lifestyles and sustaining those changes into the future. Thanks so much for having me, and looking forward to some of your questions.
Claire, thank you very much for your fascinating and extremely inspiring talk, and it's just fantastic. We do have some questions, but I'm going to keep going with our next speaker and then with Paul, and then we'll come back. We'll have time for some questions at the end. So I'd love to introduce Dr. Sheila Gilheany, who's going to talk about recognizing our relationship with alcohol and its impact on our mental health. Thank you, Sheila.
I was talking to myself there for a moment. So just thanks again very much, Claire, for that introduction. I'd like to just say at the outset that I'm not speaking from a medical capacity or indeed a psychotherapeutic kind of approach. Just want to give some background really around alcohol, some of the impacts, and maybe to explore a little bit what are some of the influences that we come under that perhaps affect the way we make decisions about alcohol. But I'll start off by saying, and really as a reminder, a lot of you would know these low-risk drinking guidelines, but the HSE would suggest that for women that we wouldn't drink any more than 11 standard drinks in the week, men no more than 17 drinks in the week. Try to aim for 2 to 3 totally alcohol-free days in a week. And if you were, having drinks at any one time, to have no more than 6 on a drinking occasion. And what they mean by a standard drink is it's actually quite important, maybe just to bear it in mind. So that would be either like a half pint of beer, a single measure of spirits, 33 mils, or a small glass of wine. And what I mean by a small glass is about 100 milliliters. And I think that's kind of just important to mention, because if you're anything like me, and any glasses that you might have bought recently or been given as a present, they tend to be like the size of a goldfish bowl, and it can skew the way we think about what we mean about a glass of wine. So a bottle of wine actually contains about 7.5, maybe 8 standard drinks, depending just on the strength of the wine. But I just wanted to put that one out there as a reminder. So why drink less? What's to be gained by actually drinking less? And I think there's actually so many, I suppose, negatives associated with alcohol that actually a little bit it can overwhelm you a bit, and it can be quite a lot to actually take in at any one time. So I try to prefer to turn that around and think, well, what are the positives about drinking that wee bit less? And maybe to pick 1 or 2 of these that I'm just going to highlight here, and use that as a means of, maybe this is a thing that'll help him, make a change in the coming year. A lot of us at this time of the year would have anxieties or worries about money. I mean, just quite simply like credit card bills coming in after Christmas. So actually simply on a very practical basis, drinking a wee bit less gives you that bit more money in your pocket. And I often find, with any things where you're involved in saving money as a means to change a habit, actually putting it aside, be that in the money box, putting it into a specific account, making it go towards paying off the credit card bill, or perhaps saving towards a special treat, actually seeing that build up is a very powerful incentive in itself. I'll very quickly just mention about more energy from drinking that bit less, but especially better sleep. And I was so interested, Claire, in what you were saying about sleep and the importance of it to our overall health, both mental and physical. And sometimes it's a wee bit surprising to people when you say that actually drinking less gives you that better night's sleep, because a lot of us would actually say, oh, I fell asleep, I fell asleep on the sofa. But the thing about it is the sleep that you get after drinking a lot of alcohol is not maybe just the best of sleep. You don't get quite into the deep sleep, and you might wake up and your sleep be a wee bit more interrupted during the night. So it's actually a good one. If sleep is a problem, drinking a wee bit less can definitely help on that front. And simply by having more energy, by sleeping, by sleeping better, you have that bit more energy, but also your body isn't working hard on trying to process the alcohol. So that gives you the energy to do the other things that you might like to do. And I'm just again listening to Claire and talking about, the exercise and wanting to get out. You'll be that bit more likely, I suppose, to get up on a Saturday morning, go out with the kids and, have a kickabout or whatever, when you have that energy. So say these things they're quite connected. We're here obviously with Aware today. So I think looking at the mental health side of things, and particularly around depression and anxiety, they are very key when we talk about alcohol, because alcohol in itself is a depressant. And even though we're surrounded by the messages that say, as a cheer up kind of a thing, to have a glass, or, it feeling like, I'm feeling bad. If I have a drink now, I'll feel a wee bit better. In fact, that's a very skewed kind of a message, and just simply doesn't work. While taking a drink can maybe push things away for a bit, unfortunately, the problems, the anxieties, maybe the depression, the feelings are still going to be there. They might have been submerged for a bit, but maybe those difficult feelings are there to be explored. And it really does make a difference in reducing the amount of alcohol in terms of where you're going to feel in yourself, particularly I would say around the depression and anxiety. And I'm very conscious as I'm speaking here, as I don't want to say that I'm speaking from a medical or a therapeutic capacity, but I'm going to give some links at the end of this to the HSE and the Ask About Alcohol site, just to give you that bit more background information on why particularly that's important. For others amongst us today, physical health is maybe something that is quite a worry. And that could be, there could be a whole range of things there that can be going on. Maybe there's somebody in your family who has cancer, maybe somebody else, if there's a history of heart problems. But actually reducing the amount of alcohol that you take has a significant impact on about 200 different diseases. And I've just listed a couple here. Specifically, I'll say around cancer. Actually, there's 7 different types of cancer which respond to drinking less alcohol. And I'd say I mentioned particularly blood pressure, heart disease, and I see you have a typo there with stroke, but you can make a difference. And these are, I would suggest, if you were kind of wanting to look at drinking a bit less, pick 1, maybe 2 of these as the focus of the reason why you're doing it, and you get all the rest of them as an added sort of benefit. But sure, we know an awful lot of this. I'm probably saying, nothing terribly new, something you'll have heard an awful lot of this before. But what is it that actually stops us from making those healthy choices, even when we know, even when the logic is there to tell us about that? And I suppose, first and foremost, you might want to just move on to the next slide. First and foremost, alcohol is an addictive substance. And we maybe like to try and pretend that it's not, or say, oh, it's only for people who are dependent that there is a problem. In fact, actually, for all of us, that not dependency, but the addictive nature is there with it as a substance. And the more you have, the more you're kind of inclined to feel, yes, I'd like another drink, or the effect of thinking, yes, this will be something that will help. So that is, I'd say, first and foremost, something really to bear in mind. But aside from that, there's I think a wealth of, I can only describe it as really of an environment that's alcoholic. We are absolutely surrounded by messages that come indeed from the alcohol industry, but so much so through marketing, but you'll see it in linkages to to sport, to music, to culture. Practically anything that is important to us, you'll find that there is an association with alcohol. So you can see that through sports sponsorship, you'd see it through music festivals, you see that through influencers, people that you maybe follow on Instagram or whatever. So many of them will be attached or will be being paid essentially to promote alcohol. Back in the 60s, we were actually drinking about a third less than what we were drinking at the start of the early 2000s. And you sometimes have to ask yourself, we didn't change, our genes didn't change in that time. Why did we treble the amount of alcohol that we might consume over the course of those 3 decades? And really it comes down to alcohol became much, much more widely available. You can go into any supermarket, you'll see it easily, freely, not really, but quite cheaply available, because it was also significantly reduced in price over the course of the last number of decades. But on top of that, we absorbed an awful lot of the messages that we were seeing on advertisements, so that they became something that actually we identified very strongly with. And whether that's through, birthday cards that you might be sending just to say going into the shop, but every occasion has been linked in some kind of a way, I would say, to a drinking occasion. And those messages with things like, you deserve it, everyone is drinking, you need it to cope, you won't have a good time without it, are actually quite deeply embedded, I would say, at this stage. And so I would say, first and foremost, don't be hard on yourself. If you feel that you are drinking too much, kind of just say, actually, let's maybe just take a step back on that. Why am I doing this? So when those memes come in, and I would get loads of them, I'm sure you all do too, on your phones and stuff like this, with the a funny wee joke, and you do laugh when you see the things about that, especially over COVID. But maybe just take a step back and say, what is that message? What am I actually being told here? Do I really want to do this? Is it something? And I think that can help a little bit, just to, if you like, open up your thinking about why you might be drinking at any particular time. I wanted just to move on, because sometimes when we talk about drinking, we're usually talking about our own drinking and the impact on our own health. But I wanted just to mention here, and I can only really do it briefly, but I can maybe point you towards other areas that might be of interest. Alcohol Action would have a specific initiative which we call Silent Voices, and what we're looking at there is the impact that problem parental alcohol use would have on children. And we would describe this as being I suppose, a trauma that can actually last a lifetime. We certainly estimate that at the moment there's about 200,000 children who are living with the impact of a problem with alcohol in the home. But that actually also translates into a significant number of adults. We estimate there's about 400,000 adults living in Ireland at the moment who have been brought up or have experienced significant trauma in their childhood as a result of drinking of one or more of parents. And it is a complex area. It's not just that there's harm caused. It's the, I suppose, juxtaposition between, loving somebody, all that love that's there between a parent and the child being worried about the parent drinking, but the uncertainty that goes with it as well. Who's the person who's going to be there when I come in from school? Is it the loving parent who's got dinner ready, or is it the parent who, for whatever reason, is just not able to be there at the time? It can lead into, so many different areas. It can be from as straightforward as, not having the basic resources, the money perhaps, there to keep food on the table. It can lead into violence. We're very aware of the connection between domestic violence and alcohol. But I would say a huge element of it is the impact that it can have on how we live and how we deal with our feelings. In so many families where this is a problem, there's an omerta. Don't mention it. Don't talk about it. Above all else, do not mention it outside of this household. And in that not talking, not trusting, both the trust between the parent and the child, but trust in yourself. Are your feelings real? What are those feelings? In fact, actually, those feelings can be numbed to a huge extent. And we do know, and we see this certainly from the research in this area and from our own experiences of talking to others who've experienced this, that there are linkages with depression, with anxiety, with other mental health difficulties that can come, but actually also physical health too, that there are quite significant, I suppose we're all one person, head, mind, body, the whole lot, emotions, they all come together. I would say that this is something that is maybe striking a chord with anybody who's listening today, and maybe you're already perhaps thinking about getting some help with an ongoing problem that's there. It's worthwhile perhaps saying to a therapist that you might approach that this is something that is in your background, and to ask them, is this something that they have had experience in working with? Because not only is that silence within the family, I have to say that the silence is a society-wide thing. And while we know in our heart of hearts, all of us know people that we went to school with, and we know that who were brought up in difficult family situations, but we actually do close ourselves off from it for whatever reason. Maybe it's just too distressing to think about. But it's not something that gets an awful lot of attention, and it isn't something that's easily asked. Maybe in a doctor's surgery, or as I say, in a therapy situation, of what is this particular background thing. So I would encourage you, if that is something that is striking a bell with you, to maybe to bring it up, and if you're seeking help on that. I wanted to leave you with a couple of websites that might be of use. That could help out. Our own website there, we have a lot of information. Our kind of role around alcohol is trying to push for policy changes. So things like, legislative changes around pricing, around the availability of alcohol, and around the marketing of it. But as I say, we do have this specific initiative that we call Silent Voices, and you'll get a lot more information on what we're doing in that and the kind of policy changes that we would like to see in action. If you're interested, particularly around the health side of things, I'd really encourage you to take a look at the HSE site, askaboutalcohol.ie. And if alcohol particularly is a problem that you're thinking at the moment, there is a helpline available, just the number is up. I think it is worthwhile, particularly if you feel a dependency kind of thing, or you're worried about somebody else, there is a lot of help and information to be got from that. Thanks very much for your attention, and I very much look forward to responding to any questions that might be coming up. Thank you.
Sheila, thank you so much. Again, I'm sure you've heard this before, but a very sobering thought, but more inspiring as well, and encouraging us to look at the benefits of not drinking as opposed to scaring us. I really appreciate what you're saying. We have some questions in, and I think both yourself and Claire's pieces are massive introduction into Dr. Paul Dalton. So I'm delighted to welcome Paul, the role of compassion, and let's make a resolution to be kind to ourselves. Thank you, Paul.
Do that. Thanks very much, Claire. Lovely, and thank you for the kind invitation to spend some time together today. I'm kind of thinking a little bit about the role of compassion and the resolution to be kind. I think for most of us, and particularly for those of us who have experienced depression and anxiety, that being told to be kind to oneself is really dodgy, because it tends to backfire. Because when we get depressed or low or anxious, then not being able to be kind to ourselves is another reason to beat ourselves up. So I think that's really important to say. So I want to talk a little bit today about maybe what might kindness look like? And I really think from both Sheila and from Clare that it is about taking action. And some of that is about, yes, the exercise in the world, our alcohol, our consumption generally. So the kindness and the compassion that I'd like to talk about over the next few minutes is really about a kindness and a compassion that actually involves action, and very often involves saying no. So that's just important to say, I think, as we begin. So I'm going to ask people actually just to take a breath. So if you're wherever you're sitting, maybe if you can just even let your shoulders drop a little bit and take one breath. Notice the breath coming into the body and the breath coming out. And then just to look at the photograph on the screen. So on the screen in front of you is a photograph. And for people familiar with Zoom, at the bottom of the screen, you can there's a chat facility. So what I'd like you to do is look at the photograph and then put in one word that describes how you feel, having taken a breath and looking at that photograph. So just one word. So just pop it in there, and we'll just we'll maybe call out some of those words. So a word that describes how you feel when you look at this picture and you take a breath. So maybe calm. So encouraging everyone who's out there with us today to do that, just to pop in a word that describes how you feel when you look at that picture, when you look at that image. The important thing to say about that is that I think the chat has been disabled. I see. Okay, that's fine. We can. I'll improvise. So the important thing to say. So you look at it. You look at this picture. You take a breath, and it probably brings up a certain feeling, a certain emotion. And what's important to say about that is that what we look at, how we think, what we see, impacts on our emotional state. The French philosopher and mathematician Pascal has said that in difficult times, always carry something beautiful in your mind. In difficult times, always carry something beautiful in your mind. So in these difficult days that we find ourselves in, of a pandemic and of isolation, the real advice to carry something beautiful in your mind. We have these minds, and we might look at the next slide. We have these minds of ours are incredibly tricky. We have a brain that's about 500 million years evolving. So what we've inherited in here, inside in the skull, has been evolving for about 500 million years, the form that we have it in about 200 million years. And the really important thing to say is that this brain that we have is tricky, because we have an old brain right here in the back of the head, right down here, top of the spine, and we have a new brain. And the old brain is about our survival. It's sometimes described, or I've sometimes described it as, it's the weekend brain. It's the brain that wants to rest and to drink and have sex and be very immediate. And then we have this new brain, and that's the brain that can do wonderful things in the world, like create a vaccine, can build buildings, can write poetry, can sing and dance and love and be creative. But those two brains don't always get on very well. And then the third brain, as Claire said, the third brain in the gut, so the body. But those two brains here don't always get on very well. So we have tricky brains, and those tricky brains get in the way of our well-being. They can cause us to be the opposite of kind and self-compassionate. They can cause us to be unkind, terribly, terribly unkind to ourselves, to undermine our very best intentions, to undermine our relationships, to undermine all of those things that I aspire to in life, you know, that I kind of set as my goal, my objective, how I want to be in the world, what I most value. So these brains, they are tricky, and it's not your fault. So when we find ourselves in a state of anxiety, in a state of depression, in a state of high stress, I think maybe if nothing else sticks from what I'm saying, it's not your fault. It's this brain that's 500 million years in evolution. And we've inherited a tricky brain, and some of the hardware and some of the software is faulty, and it's causing us problems. So it's not your fault, but and there are things that we can do. So that might sound like a little bit of a contradiction. It's not our fault, and there are things that we can do to help ourselves. And building on what the previous speakers have said, we can take actions that move us towards a way of being in the world that is one of love and of kindness and of deep, deep self-compassion. And that idea that when we look at self-compassion and we look at the research on self-compassion, very often people will say to me clinically, oh, if I become compassionate or self-compassionate, I'll never get out of bed. I'll never get up on time. I lose the run of myself. And in actual fact, the research says to us that something very different happens actually, that deep, genuine self-compassion involves saying no. And sometimes it involves me saying no to myself, and it involves me saying no to other people. It is very easy for us to get confused that kindness, that self-compassion is somewhere around self-indulgence, when in fact it is actually the opposite. Our kindness, our care is often best understood in terms of how we express it to other people. So if we think about the people that we care for, the people that we love in our lives, we really don't want them to engage in harmful behavior. We want them to be at peace. We want them to take action in their lives so that they can live with greater ease and greater well-being, that they can be truly kinder to themselves, to develop an attitude of kindness, an attitude of self-compassion. And I'm going to finish very shortly. When we look and teaching mindfulness in the hospital in St. Vincent's for many years, and all of the research that's been conducted on mindfulness, to do the research a slight disservice and to summarize it, that one of the most important agents, or one of the most important things that brings about change in mindfulness, is self-compassion. When we develop a more tender relationship with ourselves. And that means doing our imperfect best and getting it wrong, because we will. So a little of the new year, new you. Well, you know, new year, old you, but just doing our imperfect best, and that idea of living our lives as a compassionate mess. Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much. And we were very aware when we invited the three of you to speak that we were only going to get key nuggets. And I just have a real sense of wanting to hear more and more and more from each of you. But for the moment, thank you very much. We have got lots of questions, and the chat was disabled deliberately so that people wouldn't be distracted from it. But when I had a look at the question and answer section, there were quite a lot of words: calm, tranquil, and there was one person who said jealous and looked at the picture. And I think that's strikes your point, or emphasize your point, Paul, about it can bring up so many things. So we've gone through the questions, and I need kindness from everybody else when I'm saying no to that we cannot answer all the questions, unfortunately. So we're going to take one for each of you that kind of synopsisizes, or maybe takes a few of the other questions in. And Claire, if I can start with you, there were quite a lot of questions in terms of what the benefits of exercise for depression, and whether it was for specific types of depression, and what happens if someone is injured and isn't able. So if I could read one about the particular, no, this is being kind because I've lost my page. So could Claire please confirm what exercise is better for anxiety and depression? So that's a very general one to kind of take in some of the others. And one person had mentioned PTSD in particular, post-traumatic stress disorder, but more general one in terms of anxiety and depression.
So I suppose one thing just to caveat my answer with is that the research is still early, it's still limited. We don't know an awful lot about the exact mechanisms at play. But when it comes to depression, the research can broadly be summarized as some exercise is better than none, moderate to high intensity exercise, both aerobic, so that's running, the stuff that gets your heart racing, running, brisk walking, rowing, cycling, and weight training. So just lifting weights with your arms. There's lots of things that you can do at home with resistance bands. I suppose even if somebody is injured or has injured a certain part of their body, I think it's really important, obviously, to speak to a GP or a physio, somebody who's qualified in that area. But there are other parts of your body that you can exercise. And with depression, both aerobic and resistance exercises are helpful. So even if you can't run, and I know that feeling, because that is the way that I cope with my lower moods or with stress and anxiety. If I can't run, I then know that I need to do something else to replace that to help me manage. So there is lots of things that you can do. For PTSD, I suppose going back to that idea that the research is still very early days, there is some studies that say that moderate aerobic exercise, so something like running or brisk walking again, is helpful and more helpful in combination with other therapies. But I think if you have PTSD or an anxiety disorder, that it's really important to work with your mental health team around what you choose to do. But yes, for anxiety, combining both approaches seems to be more effective at this point.
Right. That's great, Claire. Thank you very much. And Sheila, if I can turn to you, and again, there've been a number of questions, some quite technical, like does alcohol work on the neurotransmitters, or how does it work? But I'm going to address a more general one that I am to you in particular, and it says that as an adult child of an alcoholic, I really appreciate Sheila flagging the importance and impact that that can have. And then what tips or guidance do you have for opening up conversations with peers, friends, or colleagues on this?
As I've said before, it is a very hidden topic, and it's not easy. And it's certainly not easy within the family where there has been a long-standing pattern of keeping silence on it. On the other hand, I think you'll probably find that once you do say something, there'll be so many other people will say, I have experienced something like that, and they will recognize, things that would be there. We're very conscious that there isn't an awful lot of standardized help that's out there. It's something that we would be calling for. I think I would say, if you're going to raise it with somebody, whether it's in relation to your own experience or in relation to where you think somebody else might be there, about I would very much echo what Paul has just said about being kind to yourself, about maybe not trying to push something if you're not ready to do it, but perhaps start to read a little bit about the subject first of all, to kind of build up your own confidence and belief in your own feelings. There's an organisation, EcoEye, National Organisation for Adult Children of Alcoholics in the UK. And they often talk about a number of C's. You didn't cause it, you can't change it, so it's sort of understanding where you were coming at it from as a child and where you're at it. So I would certainly in the first instance think about reading a little bit about the topic, build up your confidence in that, you see the recognition, things that are there. If you go onto our website, you'll see a lot of books and things that would help. And I think from that, you'll probably get the sense of recognizing in other people, within your own family, people who maybe have experienced that, who's perhaps a person you can first start to talk about it. Definitely look for help. And if you are looking for help from a therapeutic point of view, ask the question outright, is this something that you have come across, have dealt with as an approach to begin with? And as with any therapies, the first thing might not work. Another approach might work better at another stage.
That's great, Sheila. Thank you. And I'm just conscious of time. So, Paul, we got two from the same person that are looking at are a lot of the problems that people are experiencing today related to lifestyle choices, and then linked with, do the speakers think that the education system encourages the teaching of things like self-reflection, philosophy, compassion, and empathy? And I know you can talk to this for a long time, but as brief as you can, because I don't want to hold you for long.
Yeah. Gosh, I think our poor teachers have enough to do. And I think kindness and love is inherent in what they're doing right now. So I always get a bit concerned about asking them to take this on too. Look, how am I living right now? How's my next action going to be? Can my next action be a move towards kindness and tolerance and a little bit of care for myself, and get it wrong and see what happens?
That's fantastic. Thank you, Paul. And I didn't even have time to unmute myself there. So I'd again like to sincerely thank the three of you. This is being recorded, so it will be available on the Aware website. I'd very much encourage people to look at the Aware website and to sign up for some of the courses that are free, life skills courses, and courses that are available for family members as well. And details are on the slide as well. And I'd also like to flag in advance our next webinar, which will be on the 10th of February at 12. And that is the role of medication in mental health. And that's given by Ita Fitzgerald, mental health pharmacist. And we're learning as we go along. So with 3 people today, 3 wonderful presentations, but not much time for questions and answers. So what we're doing in February is we're trying 1 speaker and more time for questions. And then we'll have a better sense, March, April, May, what's the best balance to get. So I'd really like to thank each of the speakers again, and to yourselves for attending. And we look forward, and to the team for backing us on this. And we look forward to the next webinar. Thank you.